All right, guys. So in this video, I am going to talk about project settings. Um, Project settings is a very interesting topic, really. It's an interesting topic in the fact that there's not many videos that really go over project settings out there. There's not many tutorials that go over project settings. But project settings are arguably one of the most important things that your project has in it. So when you click that little button, you get this little window that pops up. And I have docked it to the top, which you can do with almost every window in Unreal. Should you dock every window to the top? No. Should you dock project settings to the top? Probably not. But I'm doing it anyway. So with project settings, you have this little side hierarchy or scroll box or menu or whatever you want to call it. The first thing that opens up when you come is your project category, which includes your description, because you're clicked the little arrow here is where you're at in your project settings. So you are in the description category under project. You can see that here, project dash description. And underneath it, you'll see this weird little checkbox, or this weird little thingy here, this weird little lock icon. And it says, these settings are saved in default game.ini, which is currently writable. So what does that mean exactly? So that means if we go here and we go to documents, I believe, and then go to Unreal projects and then our Blueprint Learning project, and then under config, our config folder, this is where this stuff is stored between these two, or no, sorry, not two, between these four INI files here. So you have inputs, game, engine, and editor. What we care about is these projects are saved in default game.ini, which is currently writable. So default game, if you double click this and open it, you get your settings. There's nothing in here because we haven't changed settings. But if we don't want this stuff to be changed, you can right click it and go to properties, read only, and apply. Now look what has happened. These settings are saved in default game.ini, which is currently not writable. So if I change something in here to 0, say, right, it won't change it, right, when it's locked. But as you can see, it has Unreal is smart. So if you have this checked as read only, it will change that, right, and say that yeah, it's readable. See here, it has unticked read only for us. So what's nice about that is that we can even click this here to make it writable, because it should always remain writable. There's not really a reason to lock that unless you're creating some custom project like a pre-compiled project for somebody, a template, and these are there's some settings in here somewhere that you don't want that person to change easily, at least, or without some kind of notice that they're about to change settings that might alter the project in some way. So that's a nice little feature up there. So you always want to keep it writable. If it's not writable, you know, what it is. So the first thing we'll start off with and talk about is project thumbnail. And this video might be a 2-parter, a 3-parter, 4-parter, whatever. So project thumbnail is exactly that. It's your project's thumbnail, right? So if you click it, you can select an image from your hard drive as the thumbnail for the image. By default, this project thumbnail will show up. Apologies for my kid scream. if you can hear her. Library. This it'll show up here. So you can see our default project thumbnail now is the Unreal icon, and so that's that. Now, Unreal does something cool for you. So when you save your project and you're looking at an object in your viewer, it actually takes a screenshot of this and will use it as your project thumbnail. Now, you can set this by your own means and use it as a custom thumbnail. Let me show you an example of that. We have Horror Engine. Great, great template, by the way. If you ever get the chance, go to the marketplace and search up Horror Engine. Use it. It's a little outdated as 5.11, but I hear they're coming out with a new one soon. But it's free to use. Um, and that is an example of a custom project template or thumbnail. Um, it's a template that guy created that he put his thumbnail in there. Cool. Project description. It's the description of the project, right? What is your project? A blueprint project. Cool. Now we have it saved under a blueprint project. What is that? When you hover over some of these, it doesn't show it anymore, but it used to show a description under here of what the project is. It also uses that information for compiling as well. So when you compile it, it uses that a blueprint project. Project name, project ID is a unique identifier for your project. I wouldn't mess with that too much. You can generate a new one if you want, if there's conflicting issues. It's not something you should have to modify though. Project name, and if you wanted to create one, you could just hit here. You can invalidate the the UID, or you can generate a new one. If you generate a new one, it gives you a new project ID. Project name is your project name. Blueprint project. Project version is the version of your project. That's how it normally looks, or something similar. There's major, minor, and yeah, it's three, I think. Major, minor, and a patch, essentially. Company name is your company name. Blueprint Enterprises. Company distinguished name is the author of the project. You can see that if you hover over it. Anything that you're curious of in Unreal that you need to know what they are, you can hover over top and it'll tell you. So this is the company author that created the project. This is the company author which is published tools, right? So you could also put Sphinx here, right? Your homepage is your project's URL. So google.com is mine. That's my homepage, right? So anytime someone opens up these projects and they want to know where to find the information pertaining to your project, they could go to your website. Same with support contact. I could have my Discord here. So hi number 123, right? That's not my Discord. That's someone else's Discord, but you get the point. So we close these down because we've went over those. Legal, so you have copyright information if you want to have a copyright notice here, so don't steal this, something like that. The terms of licensing, anyone can use, right? Your privacy policy, what's your privacy policy? None, we don't have a privacy policy. Those are legal things pertaining to your project, so if you're giving this out as a template, you might want to, add some of this stuff in. It's not necessary for what we're doing. The displayed page, this is your project's displayed title on your window bar. So I can't really show you this, but when you open your project, actually, you know what? I can show you this. Let me do this. Standalone game. Actually, let's try Pi Editor. All right. So up here, and this is your title of your game, right? And so what will happen is when you change that, this will change. Not in the preview or the PI in the PIE, but when you compile your standalone game, it'll give you a title that represents your game. So we'll stop what we were doing there. It has to think about that. So that's our displayed title. So we could say Blueprint Learning, and then we can do here. It says also in our description, our hover over it says we can use tokens, right? Game name, platform, architecture. So instead of using Blueprint Learning, I could use game name, right? And so anytime I change the name of the game, which is up here, up here, how about, yep. So our name, anytime I change the project name, it'll change this. Cool. Debug title info. If you're looking for a non-shipped configuration, so when you compile the game as a raw game essentially, or a debug mode, this will be what shows up. You can add parameters in there to kind of know what you're looking at. Under the settings here, you have should window preserve an aspect ratio, right? So with this, if you untick this, then your game you can literally size it to weird sizes. You want to keep an aspect ratio most of the time, unless you have a need to build any other aspect ratio. So when you resize the window, it'll hold a certain aspect ratio. So 9 by 11, for example, it'll hold that general ratio. Borderless window, if you want to force people to use borderless window, you can press that. Now keep in mind this setting right here, and along with some of these other settings in here, can also be modified with Blueprint and C++ and stuff like that. So start in VR. If it's a VR game, it'll add the -VR command line to it, so it'll start up in a virtual reality version. Allow window resizing. If you don't want them to resize your window, you can untick it. If you want them to resize, you can tick it. Allow close. If you want them to be able to close your game with an exit button like this up here, you can keep that ticked. Same with minimize and maximize. It's basically this here. Eye offset for fake stereo rendering devices. This is a very complicated setting that I won't explain right now because this has to do with how your sound is referencing. I would just keep it at the 0.032 default if you don't. And the same with this one. This is the same thing. That's the field of view for your virtual stereo device. If you don't know what they are, don't use them. Don't click on them. That's a project description. So project encryption is something that we don't really use too much unless you have a need to, really. This is encryption for pack files, your U assets. So like when you actually combine your project together and ship it, you may want to encrypt some of your stuff so that way people can't open up your files with like model viewers. So there's a UAsset model viewer out there that you can actually open up .uasset files and pull models from and extract things from them. If you need to encrypt it for whatever reason, you would create an encryption key up here. This is your encryption key. And then you would also do the encryption of the boxes that you need. So whether you need all asset files, UAsset files, pack INI files, etc., etc. We're not going to do any of those because we don't have a need to for this project. This all pertains to shipping or packing, essentially. Your signing keys. This is to basically create a key that is signatured to you and you alone. So if you say share the project with someone else, like a template, and they're unsure that it's yours or not, that's what these signing keys are. You have a public key, modulus key, private exponent key, and then enable pack sign. So it allows you these allow you to build a system essentially to prevent people from tampering with the pack files. What this would be useful for is if you had to say just as a raw example here, you had an MMO, right? And you don't want people to go in and modify what the player looks like, right? You can essentially create a signing key. That way you can compare on your server whether the client signing key is the same with the server's clients or the server's key, and if they're the same, then you can authenticate the user to go. If they're not the same, then you can tell the user, hey man, your key's not the same as the server. What have you done to modify the files? Please uninstall, reinstall, or revert it back to wherever you're at. We're not going to use that. Gameplay tags. These are tags for the basically the items essentially, gameplay source tags. None of this is terribly important for the most part for creating a basic game. This is more or less for bigger projects that actually need tags. For learning purposes, we're going to skip over the tags portion. There's a wiki page out there, I think on Unreal's website, that explains these all in depth. There's just too much in here and too much to really explain to you because this would take a whole video alone. So we're going to skip over that. We're going to go to maps and modes next. Maps and modes very quickly. Default mode, this will be the default game mode that you have selected. So if you want to say change your game mode base to something like let's see, AR World shared game base, we can do that, and it'll now be an AR shared world game base. If you want it the default game base mode, we can do that. When you actually create a game mode, let me close these. So when you actually create a game mode by going in here, blueprint class, game mode base, and you say GM underscore game, that is your game mode. And so now you can go default game mode and start GM game every time. You can also have selected game mode, right here, which if you drop it down, it'll show you what's under your selected game mode. These right here can be changed in this area, or it can also be changed if you double click on this and right here under your classes. These all pertain to different things, different blueprints and different HUDs and different aspects of your world. We're not going to get into that in this video. That's too long of a thing to discuss. Your default maps. This is where you change your default maps. So when your editor starts up, it'll start up with this map. Right? We can change it to our map that we've created here. So every time we start up our editor, this map will open. Editor template overrides. You can add overrides here for your template or your map, essentially. Your thumbnail for your map, if you want to change that to something else, you can change your map file to something. You can change the display name for that map. This overrides the settings for this map. It's still this map, but you can change it to different stuff. So if you wanted to have a custom texture in there, like have a big white screen that says main map on there, you can do that right here. We're not going to do that for this one, so we deleted it. Game default map. This is what when there's nothing else, no other maps in your list, this is the default map that will load. So we also will select map here, but when you start your game, this will be the first map that comes up. You can also do the same thing, essentially creating a more advanced settings here. So you could do local map options. There's some options that you can append to this map. The transition map. So this is a loading screen, essentially. So when you go from map to whatever, this will be what loads first. You could do stuff like loading a preload map, essentially. And as you see, there was a restart available because some of these settings that I'm changing actually do require a restart. Local multiplayer. This is something that many people might be interested in. Local multiplayer, you can do like the old school LAN party style, 4 split screen characters, etc., etc. So you have the settings to create 2 player, right? When you have 2 player, you can change it to vertical, horizontal. So you can have a guy on the left side playing and a guy on the right side playing, or a guy playing on top and bottom, right? Think of Mario Party or Mario Kart or maybe like GoldenEye, like 007. What other games have that? Halo had a split screen feature, and basically it just splits your screen and lets players play on different quadrants of the screen. You can change all these settings here. If you want 4 player to be vertical, horizontal, that way they come across the screen. Grid is the most ideal for 4 player, clearly. 3 player, it will do you favor the top, so the top half of your screen will be split in 2, and the bottom might be a bigger screen for the next player. If you want to skip assigning gamepad to a player 1, so if your player 1 has keyboard and mouse, you can do this and skip assigning a gamepad to him. If everybody else has a controller, you want to assign a controller to them. This is essentially only for PIE play, because when you package it, it'll be quite different. Game instance classes. So a game instance class, I'm not going to get into this exactly because this requires me to create a game instance class. It's basically, you can read it here. It's it runs when the game spawns and destroyed when it shuts down. We're not going to discuss game instancing for this video. Movies. Movies are quite interesting. Movies are basically like cinematics, right? Think of a cinematics. That's the easiest way to put it, right? And so you get a startup video, and you can put your video file here. Oops, sorry. You could to put your video file here, and you can load a video on your desktop somewhere, MP4s and WebMs now apparently. You can select if the player can skip the movie. Yes. Wait for the movies to complete before moving on to the next level. Straightforward. We're not going to discuss packaging. That's a whole nother video. But just a quick overview of the packaging. These are the settings that you would use to package your file or your game. There's things in here like INI keys and installing data via HTTP chunks, build settings, like your configuration down here. So when you want to ship, you would change this to a different shipping environment. Full rebuild, etc., etc. We'll go over this when we talk about packaging games. Supported platforms. These are the supported platforms that your game supports. If you're only packaging on Windows, you can uncheck all of these, right? You can click all platforms. You can uncheck all these and just target Windows. You can just target everything. This does not mean that you cannot package for these environments. What this means is if you disable these, it won't give you the option for these things. So if you're looking for only Windows, it'll give you only Windows options, right? It doesn't mean that you couldn't come in here and select the ones that you want to repackage for and repackage them. So basically, I would keep it at all platforms because then you could just select whatever you want out of there anyway. Target platform or target hardware. Sorry. So target hardware is if you're targeting specific hardware, this will optimize the project for it. Okay. So if I want to target mobile, I can do that. If I want to target a scalable or maximum variables, I can do that here. Asset manager. This really is more advanced stuff. This is how the game basically discovers these assets and where they discover them at, right? So, for example, we have primary assets to scan, our map, and our primary asset label. These are basically where the game is going to look for stuff, right? It's going to look for stuff under those things. If you want to exclude directories, so say you make a development folder, and you don't want that to be included, this is where you can do that. And you can select from here, same as you would, and you just select a different folder that you don't want to be packaged with the game. You can cook assets here, asset registry. So if you need to register a metadata tag, you'll do that here. We don't need that though. We don't need any of those settings really. So um, asset tools. Uh, we're not going to talk about asset tools. That's just out of the scope of this video really, and it'll just make it longer. AI systems. You can change your AI settings here. I'm not going to go in depth with any of these. Animation settings, same way. If you need to change any of your animation settings, how your animations work. Animation modifiers, same type of deal. Audio, this is how your audio will be handled in the game. You can have default sound classes. You can change it for your masters to different soundtracks and stuff. So if you have master, right, you have master music, normal attack, SFs, blah, blah, blah. Those come standard with the engine. You can make your own. You can also change like VoIP if you have a voice over IP address class. You can add that here. And you can do like sample rates for VoIP. Uh, that they get on the receiver side. We're not going to go terribly too much in depth with this, but quality levels. This will determine the quality level, right? You have 32 channels on the default channel. You can add more if you'd like to. Please go read the wiki and get a better explanation of how quality and quality levels work in mixers. If you're not an audio engineer and you really don't know this stuff, I would suggest just leaving it default unless you have a reason to change it. Chaos solver, I don't know a whole lot about the chaos system quite yet. But this is where you would change your solver at. So when you create a chaos solver, that actor basically in your blueprints, you can modify that here. Cinematic camera. This will determine how your cinematic camera looks when you add a cinematic camera. Collision, if you need to add a custom collision channels, that is done under the engine collision channel. The console, how your console will look when you put the game together. So what that is when you hit the tilde button, the little console will drop down. This is the information how that will look, background, opacity, and stuff like that. We're not talking about control rigs. We're not going to talk about cookers. Those are something you could look up and figure out. So, crowd manager. We'll talk about this. When you create AI crowds, so think of something like GTA, right? This is the behavioral information for those NPCs, essentially. How many agents will be supported in a crowd? Do they avoid, what's the velocity for walls they can avoid? Stuff like that. Data-driven CVARs. So these are basically variables that are attached outside of the engine, and you can make these here. And you can make floats, ints, or bools. Name them, give them a tooltip, and give them a value. And then you can use those via code in C++ or in blueprinting. Blueprinting is quite harder than using them in C++, but that's how you do that. And CVARs will be your console variable settings, and what that means is when you open up your console, you can then type in a console variable, and it will change it in your INI, and your game will read it from that INI file. Is the generally how you put it. Debug camera controller, nothing you should need to modify here, really. We'll just move on from that. Enhanced input is a new system that Unreal has to replace the old input system, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. Basically, this is how that will be affected, right? These are your thresholds, right? You have your trigger thresholds. So say you have a controller and you're pressing your trigger, and once you get to a certain point, it will give that value. That's essentially what a trigger does, or what a sorry, what a one of these values do. Enhanced input editor only. This is exactly the same as the last one. This is editor only though. This is stuff that only the editor will be able to see and do. Gameplay debugger. This is the debugging tools essentially. This is how you get it. So the apostrophe key when you're in the debugger mode will open up the active. It'll activate the panel. You can go. We'll make another video on the debugging side of things later. Garbage collection is important, but not important at the same time. This is something that out of the box works well enough. If you need to do something like change your game time where objects are purged in the world, you could do that here. I think these are in milliseconds, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. Oh, it's in seconds. So in seconds, which is game time, so 61 seconds will be the purge timer. So they allow multi-threading partial collections and yada yada yada. And again, for another video. General settings, these are your general engine settings. These are your fonts that you can change here. So if you don't like how these fonts look, you can attach a new font here, here, and here, and here, and change the way your editor looks. Subtitles, it shows your subtitles, all that good jazz. Not going to discuss LOD, the hierarchy LODs. So this is the input system, the input tab, what I was talking about. And here you can see, it doesn't say it. Oh yeah, it does right here. So access and actions mappings are now depreciated. Please use the enhanced input system and input mapping context. My personal opinion, if you don't need to use this, please don't use this. Just learn the enhanced input system. It is far superior to this. And people will argue that a lot because most people have been using this since the birth of Unreal, essentially. This basic input system has been the way that Unreal has done things for a very long time. The enhanced input system is new with Unreal Engine 5 and is far superior in my opinion because you can map things much easier that way. It's fairly difficult to understand at first if you're coming from this old system, but it should be used and learned because it'll be the way to go. And eventually, some version of Unreal, this old input system will be removed, and enhanced input system will be the way you do things. We're not talking about interchange landscaping. So when you're building your landscape, if you want to change the maximum number of layers you can have, you can do that here. The default layer info object. So if you want to change your info object from a layer, you could do that here. If you want to change the default landscape material for every landscape you create, you do that here. Not talking about level sequence, not talking about meta sounds. Navigation mesh, that's something you guys might run into. If you need to change your navigation mesh draw shapes, distances, sizes, how they're generated, your settings are here. Now, you can also do these same settings inside of an actual navigation mesh, and the navigation mesh in the world will override these settings, but these are default. Navigation systems, if you have the agents and crowd managers and stuff like that, you can put those here. Networking, these are more higher end stuff. So verify peer-to-peer services. It talks to you about that signing thing. So this, if it's checked, uses libcurl authentication for peer-to-peer certifications or certificates. Sorry, and disabling it allows you to self-sign. The world, it basically creates a origin rebasing for multiplayer games, meaning that the servers and clients have to be in different local world origins. Most of the time, you're going to keep that disabled. I think the only time that you actually enable this is for like MMOs, large scale multiplayer operations. Physics tab, everything physics in here. I'm not going to go over it too much in depth because we are already pushing a good amount of time and I don't want this video to be 10, 11 hours long. Rendering, same thing. If you're rendering from the engine, you will change the settings here. This is how things work as far as like mobile rendering, how things render mobile wise, how your materials render, how your culling works, stuff like that. You can go down and see some of these will be disabled until you enable the parent, right? We're not restarting. Again, some of these require engine restarts. Rendering overrides, you shouldn't need to mess with that. If you do mess with it, you know why you're messing with it. The slate settings, again, same thing. You don't need to really make a mess out of your slate settings. Streaming, this is where your assets determine when you start streaming things. So asynchronous loading, background level streaming. So if you have a open world, so this open world uses background level streaming. As you can see, it's checked already. And it'll give you asynchronous loading times. So we'll load 10 different slots at the same time and async them across. Yep, that's that. We're not going over those last two settings. Textures encoding. You shouldn't really need to use this ideally, but you can change it between high and low settings. You can use the RDO here. Go ahead and read about RDO before you play with this. It's the rate distortion optimization for supported encoders. If you don't know about it, don't play with it. Leave it as default. It runs fine as default. No need to change it if you don't need it. Your user interface. Um, this one right here is like how your user interface is, right? So navigation pointers. This is your focus mode, basically. Um, DPI, stuff like that. So when your DPI curve, you can set your DPI settings here. DPI scale resolution, sort of side. The application scale, depending on your scale, will determine your DPI curve. So the larger the screen, the faster the mouse. The smaller the screen, the slower the mouse. It allows the player to have better control over it, determining on what kind of size is available. And again, remember, these are engine settings. This is stuff that the engine has. So our world partition, I'm not going to discuss this in depth very much, but this will show you the instance grid size. It'll, if you know about instance foliaging and stuff like that, this is where you'll find those settings. These are your editor settings. These are settings that will only affect your editor. Things like 2D widgets, appearances for your editor, blueprint project settings. This is like you can change messaging and stuff here. Classes is how you view your classes. Um, Data documentation. I'm not sure why documentation settings are actually empty. They used to have stuff in there. It no longer does. Why it exists still here, I'm not sure. Maybe there's something when you edit, it'll go in there. Um, Basically, documentation settings is this right here. It's how this works, and I think because there's no longer in world documentation really like there used to be. There won't be anything in this setting because you'll find everything on the web now. Uh, LOD mesh simplification. You can use proxy or you can search the marketplace to find yourself an LOD reduction plugin. Um, if you need it, you know that you need it. If not, don't touch it. Level sequencing. Shouldn't really need to mess with this. Mesh simplification. This is how your mesh reduction plugin will work. Quadratic is the stock one essentially. You can search the marketplace for more of them. Quadratic basically quadrifies mesh to simplify them. Paper 2D. This is for 2D works of art that you create in here using the 2D engine. Performance. This is the viewport resolution. If you need to change your resolution based on whatever, operating system, etc., etc. The minimum resolution that the editor allows, the maximum resolution the editor allows, 2160. You can amp that up if you'd like to. Woo! Oh, we went way too high. So if you need to maybe change your editor's viewport resolution for whatever reason, that's what you'll do here. Skeletal mesh simplification, same type of deal. This is how it renders your skeletal mesh. You can search them on the market. Source control, this one's actually fairly important because this is settings if you use source control about how the validation tags work and how to basically tag things with source control. Um, what it also determines what your like change lists will work like and stuff like that. And then we have basically the same thing for plastic here. Struct viewer, this is when you're viewing structs about how you're going to view those structs. Texture import, these are your texture import settings. The auto virtual texture setting size, this is the default texture size. This is for Team Widget Designers. I've never actually used the Team Widget Designer before, but if you need the settings, they are in here. Let's see. Platforms, these are your platform settings. So we only have Windows enabled, so anything Windows enabled will come here. So when you're packaging, these are where you find your package settings. You can find things like Splash, Game Splash, Editor Splash, the icon, the reverbs, channels, cooking for audio, and then also where you can find your shader formats, so SM6, 5, and ES 3.1. Same with DirectX 11, or sorry, D3D11 will be found here. Vulkan settings, if you use Vulkan, that goes here, etc., etc. Basically, the platform section is where you'll find things related to the platform that you are building for. So Linux, you'll have just simply Vulkan up top. You'll have splash settings and audio settings. Very simple. For Android, you have a way more settings, and we're not going to get into this because that's a lot. So plugins, these are your settings for your plugins. So if you have plugins that have any kind of like additional settings to be managed, that's done here. Um, I don't know how many settings actually take use of the plugin feature here, but if you need Python, it goes here. Niagara settings here. Niagara is technically a plugin. Modeling mode is technically a plugin, so you'll find all the settings related to that here. And I know this video is a little longer than I would have liked, but this is the project settings panel. And if you need all settings, you can click the all settings button at the top and literally scroll down every single setting that is available to you in this screen, which is nice to click this and search for something like foliage, right? To be able to play with my instance grid size, for example, or splash screen. If I need to know where my splash screens are located, I can type that and see that Windows and Linux both have a splash screen I can change. Yep. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and leave them in the comment, and I'll try to answer them if I can, or know how, or redirect you to someplace that has the answer for you. And with that on note, that is the project settings in Unreal Engine. Have a good day.